Now, the other one, of course, didn't make it here anyway. In my particular case, the second one, was it material to the major program? Oh, yeah. So I qualified my report. Now, here's the next trick that people really don't get. After we've determined this question, right, if we determine it's not material to the major program, we document our thing and we go to B here about internal control. But if we decide this is a qualification to the opinion, we're now forced to make the next decision. This little corner here, if the two, this diamond and the little oval, we've now crossed the magic boundary into the yellow book. And now you have to decide if it's material to your compliance opinion, is this item of noncompliance material to the financial statements? Remember I read you that little paragraph out of the report earlier. You said, remember this. So I have to decide now if it's in the yellow book. You know, in this particular thing for me, because of the amount of legal liability that existed, I think the answer to me was yes, and I include that finding actually in the yellow book report. It's the same finding, but the reference goes into two reports, compliance and the yellow book report on compliance. Because that item of noncompliance could be significant to the financial statements. Now here's my, see the difference with RD. When we get to RD, we're only making a decision about this right here. Right? We don't have this whole other process, the two slides before. We come and meet on noncompliance is determined all right here in this window for the yellow book report. So that's why that's a little bit of a failure as opposed to single audit or HUD audit, which forces us through this decision process and asks us to make all those decisions as we go and trying to come to some conclusion about which of these processes or processes we should follow. So that bottom corner should be highlighted a little bit. I should have changed the slide. I didn't think about it till after. I should have a big yellow box. Or maybe I should take the inside of these to be yellow so we know they're yellow book related. But that's where we cross the line into the yellow book. And that's why we don't see as many findings coming out here. Now, of course, we end up in either case with B. And we'll go to B in a minute. So how do we determine non-material? Well, certainly how many items, history of non-compliance, how significant this is to HUD. Now, maybe in 3 or 4 years, EIV is not the same kind of model, but right now we rely on EIV to do a lot of stuff, don't we? And it's extremely important to HUD. Failure there is a big MOR blast. Now, MOR means Management and Occupancy Review. That would be a killer deal in the MOR. That's kind of like major violations, like do we need to replace the management agent kind of an issue. So that would be a big deal. And you have to come to those conclusions. And the problem with this now is the HUD audit guide is not exactly consistent in it, because this thing didn't exist before. EIV didn't exist when the audit guide was written. So a lot of these procedures have to be adjusted manually as we go. But we have a lot of tools in our judgment quiver to go ahead and make those calls. The key is now getting them correctly identified or documented as the process flows. Now, auditor judgment's another key thing here, so we love auditor judgment. Now, reporting stuff, I'm not going to go to the new schedule of findings and question cost. I'm just going to remind everybody that we reorganize that in two pieces. Because items that are completed, where corrective action is already completed, they do not automatically transfer next year to the prior audit findings schedule. They're done. So they don't transfer next year. And for this year, they have no corrective action plan. Both HUD and single audit now make those two distinctions. So that wasn't by happenstance. HUD, we segregated the schedule into two types of findings. The first one is findings for which corrective actions are in process or haven't been started. The second one is findings for which corrective actions have already been completed by the end of our audit. Now, they made that second distinction important because we have a tendency to automatically transfer current year findings to next year's prior audit findings schedule. But if they're completed now, they don't go. And they also don't require corrective action plans in the current audit. Whereas the first category does transfer and does require corrective action plan. And what I also said behind that was single audit and HUD audit guide are, well, by next year, when new single audit rules come into play, we'll be together. They're basically the same. Now, the other thing about this is the sample sizes and the population information in the findings. Again, people complain about HUD. By next year, single audit will ask the exact same discussion of items in the findings schedule the way HUD does now. Now, why did George know that? Well, he sits on the single audit roundtable. The rules have been in place 2.5 years already. They just haven't been implemented because we're giving the agencies time to actually rewrite compliance supplements. So he knew all that going in, changed it last year on his final hurrah out the door, and people are complaining about it all over, and I said, just get used to it because professionally, this is going to be the information that we're being asked to provide, and quite frankly, some of it comes from our own clarity standards. Okay, so those two together. Now, here's the next thing that's interesting. We get tired of the statement of condition, criteria, effect, cause. Clarity standards now require all findings reported by CPAs to adopt the same format. So any finding a CPA reports in the standards anywhere follows the Yellow Book format now. Criteria, effect. And here's where we miss the chance to be a little bit more of a value provider. Because most people are so blunt, statement of condition. They didn't run EIV. What's required? They're supposed to run EIV. What's the effect? Well, they didn't correctly adhere to the rules under EIV. What was the cause? We don't know. We don't care. They're stupid. What? Recommendation, don't do it again. Run EIV. Right? You'd be surprised. I see 700 reports. What's that? That's how it goes. One sentence, one phrase. No absolute context of all about this finding. This is where the gentleman that I fixed his finding, we made all of our case, right? What was the statement of condition? Employee stole money. Client caught her within a month. Fired her. Has begun to that's the statement of condition that actually happened. What's the criteria? Well, employees are supposed to be held to be honest, and we have a fidelity bond, which we have. What was the effect on the statements? Nothing, right? The effect on the project was, and we describe it, the client caught her early, fidelity bonds being processed, there's no negative impact to the project. It took us about 2 sentences to say that. What's the cause? Employee chose to be dishonest, right? Recommendation, none. Client did everything perfect. Now, when you see that as the client or you see that as HUD, what are you likely to... Is there not a different picture that comes to your mind? When HUD sees these things, they're manic about this. Should we get involved? Do we need to go down and fix something, right? Should we stick our fingers in the pie somewhere along the way? And the answer, of course, in almost all those cases is please stay away, right? Please don't come over here and help us. Your help will cause us more grief than anything else. So we miss an opportunity here when we don't get descriptive of what these are. Okay, response is either cleared or not cleared. Completion date. Now, we've had some kickback lately, missing the contact person who gave us the response. Now that sounds like a dumb thing, but I can tell you in public housing, they're rejected off the top because they actually see the finding. Multifamily housing saying you should put that in there, but I don't think it's the same thing as it is in other cases. What's that? Call less. Yeah. Hallelujah. You get me to answer, that might be a miracle. Now, we come to internal control. And this is the place where a lot of us falter. Every instance of non-compliance that we encounter should come back and process through this page also. Now, let's take my first situation. They didn't do the recertifications on time. They decided that they should not have processed a finding and maybe not reported it 100 times. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. But we came to this page because I knew where this conversation was going to go. I can tell immediately how this is going to flow. I said, let's come over here. We didn't process our recertifications in a timely manner. We decided not significant enough to report as a non-compliance finding. But let's describe the issue. Is this a significant deficiency? Okay, now the question starts again. What happened? She quit. Okay. Why did the non-compliance occur? Well, they didn't send anybody else out to process recertifications. Well, you mean they didn't have a process for ensuring that recertifications occurred when they had a change in personnel at the site? No, apparently not. Well, why did it not how did it not happen more, or how did it happen this way, and how did we not know this? And I said it was BAL. Blind A luck. That nothing really happened to cause us to go over the 15. Oh, so I asked the further question. Did they go over 15 months? And the CPA didn't know why I was asking, did they go over 15 months? And I said, because at 15 months, after the last recertification date, HUD automatically stops paying the voucher. That person is no longer a valid tenant at 15 months. So how did we know it? What kept us from going over 15? Blind A luck. Hallelujah. And the client's sitting there going, well, we didn't really have a procedure. And I'm going, I understand that. Okay? So, is that likely to be a significant deficiency? Well, technically we had it happen and we just concluded that maybe because of the one it might not have been a finding, but it certainly could have been a big issue if it had happened 2 or 3 more times. So they came to the conclusion that they did probably have a significant deficiency. And they asked, should it have been a material weakness? And I guess that I helped them, I prodded them along on that one to say, look, I don't think it can get material because after the first month of failure, right when the voucher gets cut short, you're going to fix everything in a month. So it probably can't become material to the process, but it certainly could be significant to have had happen. Now, what did we actually do in this conversation? We actually ended up reporting the finding 100 times because they had no process at any site. And it was only luck that stopped this. As opposed to the conversation that we reported non-compliance 100 times, and the client said non-compliance didn't occur 100 times, right? And we know, quite frankly, that it didn't. So they felt, we'll talk about that on group project-based testing in a minute, but what we did was to change the conversation to what did happen wasn't material to what could have happened, could have been significant, and now the client has very little, if you will, defense against the comment because they can't say it didn't happen 100 places. We know it didn't, but it could have happened at any one of the 100, at any time. And so the CPAs came back, oh, I guess we feel better, right? We're not so screwed after all. And I said, see, the process works if people will apply the model. In your case, why did they failed to do it? We come to run the EIV reports, right? Was describe the issue. Is it a significant deficiency? Yeah. In fact, it might be a material weakness. And that weakness might simply be this. You have no training program to instruct people on the importance of EIV. You don't have a clue what this is. Right? And in fact, that one, because it was a material noncompliance, you probably end up with a material weakness at the same time, and people don't necessarily always report those. Now, I don't believe in a one-to-one relationship between noncompliance and internal control weaknesses, but I do believe that in most cases there are links in how they're applied. And I don't care whether you're single audit or HUD or whatever, that's the model that's been applied under the professional standards. People have just never seen it charted before. So that's the process. Now we've actually taken this into a little Excel spreadsheet. What did I do with it? Oh. I guess I don't have it here right now. Maybe at the break I'll get it and pull it up just for a quick thing. So now, what we did is we put it into a series of questions, and the spreadsheet just automatically refills the next option for you, and you're just forced to put some documentation. If no, then describe here why you made your choice. It takes about a minute to fill out. It's really that quick. It just depends on how much you type. It's a series of drop-down boxes, yes, yes, no, yes, and at the end it summarizes for you. Here's your thing. You have a finding. It's going to be referenced here, here, and here. And it documents all that in one place. The firm who actually put this presentation together originally did it based on a form they actually maintain in their work papers. So now I just automated it. So we have that now. It doesn't work. The logic works from the spreadsheet side, which was Kathy's goal. She needs to sit down with me and go through the actual results logic that should happen if then this, what the Boolean logic is, because she doesn't understand the reporting model. So I should have that done certainly in the next couple of weeks. Because right now I know the one I have doesn't really work the way it's supposed to. It shows the process, but it draws a bad conclusion. It has some language, some logic in it that doesn't work right. Anyway, but that's our process. Now, I don't care where we are in the HUD audit guide with regards to this, okay, or single audit. That's the process. Now, other things, group project-based sampling. Let me just comment on their process. They concluded that once they had an item of noncompliance, they had to report it 100 times. Right, Jana? Which is why you do not allow any group project-based testing at your locations. Okay, now I generally agree with that. And that's what the requirement says. However, in this case, the client's contention, contention being an operative term, a lot of contention, and their position was, look, it only happened once. And the auditor says, well, that may be, but I'm handcuffed by the HUD audit guide to report it 100 times. Now, the answer to that dilemma is that you are generally constrained. However, you are not completely constrained to do something dumb, because the client goes, this is dumb, right? I said, you're not really required to do something dumb if you think it's dumb. But what you are required to do is to, if you're going to have that contention, you have to be able to have some evidence to back it up, because the contention is it didn't happen everywhere. It only happened once. So the real problem was internal control. It could have happened anywhere, but it only happened once. So how would they have got out of that had they just chosen to report the noncompliance once? What would they have had to do? Well, the audit guide tells us very clearly, we don't require you to expand testing. We just require you to report. But there is no prohibition on technically expanding testing. So in our case, what we told them they could have done is if the contention of the client is it only happened once, we have to get evidence that it only happened once. So they were told to expand testing on the other 80 projects, right? Not included in the sample. Because they know 19 out of the 20 didn't have the problem. So expand the sample into the other 80 projects and test for only one attribute. Did you certify in a timely manner? And if you can pass that threshold, because they were positive, by the way, they could have done that. And it would have come back negative. Now you have audit evidence to support the departure from the guide. So the guide wasn't a hard and fast rule to say, you must report. It says that initially, but if you read other places, it says we don't require expansion, we just require reporting. But it didn't prohibit my expansion to avoid reporting, because now I have evidence that says it wasn't true. The assertion was not true.
Even before expanding, though, if you only had it at 75% of the files, at 1 out of 20 projects, that's still only 5% of the projects tested. Wouldn't that be enough to say? I mean, if you had 110 file out of 200 to be tested that had an issue, then you wouldn't find enough.
HUD's position, though, here's HUD's position. You don't know that. You're making an assumption that you can't back up with. You have an assertion you can't back up with evidence. So we know 1 out of 20 had it. How do we don't know 4 out of 100 have it, or 5 out of 100 have it? So that's the process. That's our audit evidence. That's why in many cases substantive testing we are to project error rates, right? And single audit requires that now. By the way, HUD hasn't been so specific about it, but the new single audit requires projection of error rates. In fact, HUD really does too, because the standards do. But in my opinion, to get over that, the only way to overcome that requirement that HUD's ever accepted is expansion of the testing. So George would say, and has said to me, if that's your contention, you better come to me with evidence and documentation that that's the case. Otherwise, you better be reporting. That's how he approached it. So I've tried to hold to the spirit of what he indicated, and I think it's the wise course. Some people think I'm an idiot for even suggesting you don't have to report. And I'm going, I have to report unless I have clear evidence to support my assertion that it's not across the board. Okay? And I had to go find evidence to do that. And that may not be worth it to expand testing, right? In some cases, it's easier to report. And that's what HUD wanted. They wanted that reporting. So to be able to depart from that causes us a little grief. We have to do something to get past it. Like I said, some people don't believe you can get past it at all.
Expanding the testing, because this was a very specific instance, where someone quit or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you expand your testing, you may not be testing the property where maybe that happened as well. I know it's a guess, but that was the whole point of setting up group-based testing.
I don't disagree with you in general. I just didn't go the all or nothing route. All or nothing unless I have something very clear and persuasive to justify otherwise. That's the only caveat I add.
Yeah.
So I think it's all or nothing unless, right, you can come to me with evidence that it's not all or nothing. And maybe in your judgment, the amount of evidence necessary to reach that conclusion isn't worth it.
Yeah.
And that's a decision.
And if this was the only property out of the 100 that had somebody who left that they didn't replace, then, maybe it is, but...
It was the only...
I don't like the group-based testing.
And I understand, and I'm okay with people who never use it. All I wanted to tell them is I believe there is one caveat that you could apply in this case that, when supported by evidence, gives you reasonable conclusion to vary from the guide. Okay? I don't want to vary. Look, I'm not into varying from the guide, but I'm also not. I'm into agreeing with the guide as a complete package, not as one chapter or another. And so the answer for us is, and I had that conversation with George. So specifically, I know, but his standard of documentation was a requirement.
So we would look at our clients to even determine if we could use it. I mean, Stacy probably has a few where she could do it because the management company is so good and so consistent from year to year.
So was this one.
Yeah, well,
So was this one.
with the ones I work with, I'm not sure that I could ever.
Well, no, and I'm not suggesting you jump into group project-based sampling. All I'm into is saying, look, for those where you did do it, I would never go into group project-based sampling assuming I could always get out of the reporting. So that's not the assumption I want to make. They had already decided that was their economic savior for them on the job. Okay. And they had one situation that came up that's specific. In that case, I could give them opportunities, in theory, that they could do work to suggest or to generate the evidence necessary to overcome the requirement. And that may not be possible in the other 6 out of 8 we get. It was just in this particular case, the assertion seemed pretty clear that, well, number one, they hadn't had any other turnover. So that helped. And so if they were willing to go test that, they could have had that assertion backed up. I'm with you. I don't want to ever approach it saying, oh, well, group project-based test, and if we come up with an error, we'll just work our way around it. Please don't assume or think that's what I mean to say. I just meant that in certain circumstances, there are opportunities to not be handcuffed by a rule when you believe the rule is completely wrong in this case. So I think there are chances to help yourself out. They're not that common. Okay? I would not go into it with any other assumption than reporting. Okay? Well, the client has to agree, right? The client has to agree to the sample because see, this was their problem. We told you not to agree to it. If you didn't want to agree to it, you didn't have to agree. You wanted to pay us less money, so you agreed. We found an error. In our judgment, it was a finding, and now you're madder than hell at me, right? Well, I told you this was the scenario. So I didn't really feel that bad, okay? I just felt that there are circumstances that they present opportunities to develop evidence to the contrary that are not necessarily always available in any case at all. So you're just kind of where you're at. And I don't really like group project-based testing as it is. I'd prefer to say, I got 100 freaking projects. Let's go pick a sample from 100 projects. Make the sample 2 from every project. It's 200. That's a better deal than group project-based sampling because at least I got stuff from every project. And I'm looking at the system. I like that better. And it's still a much easier sample. But that's the way it is. I don't actually see us getting rid of that anytime soon unless the AICPA really forces that choice down their throats because it was a sacred cow to George. So I don't know how that'll go now with the new crowd. Never say never. But no matter what happens, I can tell you the goal is to get you to report findings, right? Okay. I hope that conversation is worth something. To me, that's one of the best conversations I think I've ever had in class, just because it really refocuses whatever the little issues. We really understand the audit guide, chapters 1 through 3. What's wrong? Is there something wrong? It's still here. Okay. It keeps falling off my tie. So I to really understand chapter 3 or to apply it correctly, we have it memorized now. But what we still make a lot of mistakes and still don't know a lot of things about it because we improperly apply procedures to a certain process that isn't really our process, if you will. Okay, it's 2:18, 2:20. It's break time. To a state lifetime sex offender, and also list all the states every family member has ever lived in, so that you can then go do all those states' background. And of course, that's why people still do 50 state, because I guess if I'm subject to a a Missouri sex offender registration, I may omit to you that I've lived in Missouri. That actually came up. I have a neighbor whose brother-in-law, never mind, it's a sad story, but he got into Utah, and now her family is completely ignorant of the fact that he abused their daughter. And he came to Utah to seem to have escaped it all. But the one brother-in-law, my friend, had somehow found out that he was actually a registered sex offender in Missouri. Anyway, it's a long story, but, long live the Capture the Perv program, right? So that's a change in the application. So the applications must change. The other supplement is the 92006. That must be there too. I don't get as excited about that. Wait lists. Okay. I want to ask Jana, you, maybe Ed, how do you guys feel about the wait list? They're all looking around.
We changed things this year. Justin changed things this year based on conversations with you, but we've always tested the wait list in the past.
But you're not now.
No.
I don't find a reason to do it. I got all these things on the wait list, and I think my problem is just this. I want HUD to really make it clear to me. If I look at a procedure and it says do these on the intake, see that came off the wait list, those first four, that first sample in the audit guide, I don't find the basis for that or the objective for those tests is fair housing. And if that's my objective, I have a hard time doing those procedures. So I want HUD to tell me, I don't really care what HUD tells me, I'm not going to do it right now. If that's me, I'm not going to do it. So you guys have apparently decided the same goal. There are a lot of people are afraid to not do it. I don't know what the risk is really. So that's why I came here and I said, look, I don't know that this it's a fair housing issue completely. I think everybody who looks at it comes to that conclusion. They're just afraid maybe to drop it. So this year, you're going to drop it. Okay. I don't know that I feel vindicated or anything. I just think it's the only way to consider that. Because if I keep doing it, I'm testing now. Am I really testing for fair housing? If I report the finding, what am I reporting? A fair housing violation? And if I do the test, in my tenant files, is that test basically giving me fair housing assurance? I don't like any of it. HUD, I don't think they get the difference. You know what I mean? They take the report away, they get rid of fair housing as a section, but fair housing's buried into tenant file testing, and then everyone goes, well, isn't that tenant file testing? Well, with the result of determining fair housing compliance, I mean, I don't know what to tell you about that. I just don't like it.
Do you see a lot of the other firms dropping that testing, or do you see others that are keeping it?
Well, if I say talk to Mark Podnos at Resnick, he sometimes is aggressive and sometimes he's circumspect. I think this is one of those where they're looking at it and probably dropping it, although I don't have a firm commitment. I know plenty of others who have dropped it, but I know others who have not. And they're just always, those who don't are a little afraid of making changes for some reason. They're conservative. And I'm going, look, I'm conservative. Trust me. I'm very conservative. But at some point, when something's gone as an objective, it's gone. It's time to let it go, right? And I think this is one of those. I would rather take time to test EIV or some of these other issues than say, look at the wait list. Anyway, so it's a mixed bag. The other thing that I found very interesting through my public housing time this past summer, I've been actually living in these housing authorities for one week. I was out of town for 2 straight weeks. And listening to their work, this whole screening thing has turned into more than interesting to me because one lady went through an interview with some young lady, and I counted almost 7 times she said, don't lie, essentially. Now, it was really delivered with charm. Right? Southern kind of charm. Now, honey, Don't lie here. We're going to be running you against these reports. So, girl, don't lie to me. Now, miss, I tell you, don't lie. And I commented on it after. And she goes, hell, it ain't enough. They still think we're not going to catch them. And the two clients that were in the room yesterday both spoke quite highly of EIV's ability to catch most of their malfactors. Now, it doesn't really fix the problem from the perspective they don't get money back, but they do try to stop malfactors from occurring. And it's been very effective. So I thought it was kind of funny about this, but some of these people are just idiots. They think they're going to get by with this forever, and they're not. So it was kind of funny to me to go through those interviews. Again, advise the family that their info will be compared against the Big Brother thing, resident rights and responsibilities, EIV and U. I had one yesterday. What was the one yesterday? They brought up a finding about this. And it was something here was the deal. They had a lady at a site who started her own little business charging for these extras. So when they wanted to do a unit move, she charged them $300. Of course, she put it all in her pocket. It never came in separately. She told them that it had to be cash or money order made out to her. Well, it went on for 2 or 3 years until one day the lady didn't show up for work, and one of the residents showed up with the payment and called the office wanting to know how they really wanted her to handle the program. And they said, "What program?" And they said, "Well, I've been told to pay this amount of money." Oops. Now, the funny thing about that was, I only bring it up for this reason. He asked me if it was fraud. Is it fraud? Okay, yes. What's the client's responsibility now? Because they got all their cash they were supposed to. She just started this side business. And some of the questions that came out of this are the clients, do they have a recourse back to the management company because she was dishonest? I don't know. But what failed to me was their resident rights and responsibilities brochures, which clearly indicate things they shouldn't be charged for, and yet they were still paying for it. Now they claim they didn't know. But at some level, you wonder if you just decide the system is to be gamed. So if I want to work, I got to be in the system and game it, right? Because I know I shouldn't be paying this, but because I'm afraid, and maybe I think what happened on this particular case was they failed in control for not having a hotline issue. This is how we resolved it yesterday. They probably should have had a complaint line, like with the work orders, essentially calling up for that, but to say, hey, I'm not supposed to be paying this, but not one resident in the 2 years ever pointed out they shouldn't be paying it. And they just kept paying it. And they're asking me, how do we fix that? I'm going, I don't know. Right? Sometimes you could have all the education you want, and the people still feel beat up on by this manager who holds this positive change in her hand, and they're afraid to rock the boat. So it was kind of an interesting conversation about this, but those brochures are really provided to them to help them understand what their rights are and their responsibilities are also. Okay, screening. PHA, can use a PHA for screening. Of course, we're adding the state sex offender registry to all this. Quite frankly, a lot of owners are wondering now if they shouldn't come in and actually just require, as a matter of record, a sex offender run every recertification. And HUD's saying we allow you to do that. However, you must do it if you're going to do it for one, you do it for everybody. So it's getting that amount of attention, and they're actually the only reason they're not really willing to run criminal is because they don't have easy access to cheap criminal background checks. Whereas a housing authority does them all for $10. Both. And most of the housing authorities I know are wired into these state database systems that are 50 state related because of the government nature of the housing authority. So anyway, screening reviews, added all that into here for that. EIV, of course. I'm going to skip through the next 12 slides here pretty fast. EIV, so again, already in place, not a new requirement for us. New in the handbook, we're already doing this work. But it did say the owner must do this particular list of things, right? Unemployment benefits, Social Security benefits, tenant disputes on the EIV, all policy matters implemented into the guide but came straight from EIV for the last 3 years in place. So that's fine. We're just actually asking them to formalize it in the document. Income from assets, calculating adjusted income. Again, we added foster adult here. $480 per person. By the way, I want you to pay attention to that one for a while for that. Income reports, household members disclosed, Social Security numbers, all that's listed. Methods of verification, already EIV we've had for 3 years. Upfront income verification obtained from an independent source, which is EIV again. It came straight from the housing notice on EIV. 120 days pay stubs, verifications on 39. That's all still basically EIV kind of information or a few changes about the rules. Electronic information, how we handle that. Again, I'm going through this really fast. Okay, now the next thing, slide 42. Consents expire at 15 months. Now we know why. So again, the audit guide has some additional changes in it. So when we see this first one, number 2, household members correctly identified, head, co-head, and all tenants 18 and older, sign the consent to release information from HUD 9987A. Now what we tell them is consents are only good for 15 months. By the way, a new consent every annual recertification. So the audit guide, don't do that. I don't want to say that. I can't read that. Sorry. That's print. What a retard. Sorry. I just want to save that so I didn't have the same problem again today where I just close the lid and it doesn't save. So you see the changes I've made here. Consents, Social Security numbers, save system, and we'll come back to this other thing in a minute. The model lease, we have a change in the model lease this year also. So we're coming back and making changes to the guide. All 3 of those changes, by the way, are mandatory because if you don't know that information and you rely on the audit guide to tell you, you'll be wrong. Okay? For that. Verifications are good for 120 days, not 1,200 whatevers. I'm sorry. EIV income reports. EIV again, EIV, right? Refusal to sign consents, failure to, that's a kick out of the program. You'll be out. Record keeping, copies of the EIV income reports. Now, 47. This is the next one that must be done. This year, you need to make sure the client updated the model lease for the VAWA lease addendum. So, they have to have updated their lease this year. So every recertification you examine in this year, you should probably actually ask them whether they've updated that lease. That would be a procedure to add this year only. Okay? You may get that through your new intake testing or you may get it at recert. I don't care which. In fact, I think recert is a mandatory request here, because simply they needed to give them 60 days notice on the lease change before recertification. Now, that's something that only happens infrequently, but that's a big deal to see if they're in compliance. On slide 49, does some very important things to this. So they have to attach the addendum to the lease. Everybody's required to sign it. You get protections against eviction for the victims. And the single most important thing is you get a lease bifurcation ability. So the owners now can have an offending party in the unit, kick them out, and the lease isn't violated because the other parties stay protected under the lease. So they've made that legal change. That's one of the things the lease addendum does. Now, to do that, they had to give the modifications to the tenants 60 days prior to the expiration of their current year, if you will, lease, that next recertification. So that's what we're really asking for now in the recert world. This particular year, it's probably asking, by the way, I'm adding a fifth item. So if I have my recertification issues, I say consents, EIV reports, identifying family members. So EIV's got income in it, family members, sign the 5-9, and I want to know now, did you give notice of the lease change 60 days before? Because that's a major thing for them this year. Next year it goes away, but for this year, and of course now on my new ones, did you change the app? We'll go through that process here in a minute. Okay, assistance animals. No, they're completely removed from pet policies and the pet deposit. So that's a nice little change for a lot of folks. New tenants, we are going to talk about VAWA, EIV, and U-brochure, so that's a new thing to add. And then, of course, being able to communicate with everybody is a big deal. Now, annual recertification requirements. Oh, by the way, isn't this interesting? We have a section on annual recertifications. Now, I want to actually look at this from the perspective of the audit guide. Now, you guys have heard me tell this thing before about the procedures listed here. Okay, and if I'm going to skip out of this and come back to the audit guide. And I don't think this is a problem for you. I'm just saying, here's how most people look at this. We start here, we pick our sample, recently admitted as well as tenants, and then we perform a minimum of the following steps as applicable. So, you know how I've said this before about research. I don't really feel the need to look at my application, right? I don't think that's a big deal for a research. Now, I got a list of things going down here that I don't need to do in every case about research. Now, that's been Les's position, okay? Now, it didn't dawn on me until just this year to look at this 7.4. Here's the 7. Oh, sorry. It's not on your screen. It's on my screen. The funny thing about this new PowerPoint is it automatically splits your screen for you, so you have to get used to running a couple of different ways. Okay, so here we sit there, and we're told here's what the client is supposed to do. Key requirements of annual recertifications. So that's what this is. Annual recertification, key regulations, key requirements. So, conduct a recertification annually. Recompute rents and assistant payments based on information gathered. Tenants have to supply information requested. Sign consent forms and asset declaration forms. EIV income report. Owners must use, right, Justin? This is where we got our complete finding from. We must use the income report. It has third-party verification of employment and income unless the tenant disputes it. And then if they do, we have some other procedures. Third-party verification for some other things, income, and EIV is that third-party verification. assets, provide the tenant with a copy of the fact sheet and an EIV and U brochure. If owners have the authority to conduct a criminal background check, including state lifetime sex offender, however, it must be done on everybody. They don't have to do it. And then we're pretty much out of the requirements. 236 got some issues here. If I'm paying market rent. So you got a list here. So I question again why the HUD audit guide makes me do these other things when HUD clearly only says the client's requirements are to do this. And if you go back to my mandatory 4 or 5, EIV, income reports, consents, has my third-party verification. If they don't reconcile, we're to look at the third party, whatever else to fix it, right? The fix is on the reports. Sign the 5-9 and completely filled out. And, of course, identify the family members, the number of people in the unit. That's pretty much in line exactly with what HUD said on 7.4. That's all that's required by the owner. So I still believe, no matter how I cut this, maybe I'm just looking in places that make me happy. I don't know. I'm certainly subject to those kind of desires. But I think the goal of this process is to get us to determine whether the client has complied in the current year with its requirements. I'm not subject to all those prior year requirements. I'm here to see did they comply this year for the period from January through December with their compliance requirements. If that includes 85% of my people being research, I still reserve the right to say that's all the client's required to do. I'm going to test that. I'm not going back and digging through files 10 years ago on senior housing to get my initial research done. Okay, so if I go to move-ins, right, I'm going to go back to the HUD audit guide, and now I do have to look at their app. I have to look at citizenship through SAVE, which is new. Citizenship through SAVE is new. I've got to do all those other things. I have to look at the lease. Okay? All the other things the guide listed are required to be done in that case. Okay, let's think about that, right? That's a good question. And I'm going to go over this a little more tomorrow because I don't have time to do this all the way I want to and finish something else. I can do it now. We can do something else tomorrow. Okay? That's a good question. So what I do with this, by the way, I did something really stupid recently. And I told somebody in class, if they would get me this information, I would prepare their work paper for them. Okay? And I'll hold that out for you. I'll do the same thing. I'll do it once for you, right? So here's what I did. I went to Trax, and I know you can't see this. Maybe what I should do is have somebody, we'll print this. Can we have it printed and use it in class tomorrow? Let's do that. So I'll show it immediately now, but here's the thing. This is the Trax Assistant Payment Report. The client, when the guy asked me last Friday, I had class. By Tuesday, he had this to me. I asked him, it wasn't complete. He said, I only sent you the first 2 pages or whatever. So by the time we got it last night, I've started working on it. So it lists, and it came downloadable into Excel. Now, my other complaint about staff, okay? I have a complaint about staff. You guys are freaking geniuses with some of these spreadsheets. What the hell for? I sat in one class in Alabama with this firm, and I said, that's the best thing. I've never seen a spreadsheet so beautiful in my life. How long did that take? And the partner says, probably friggin' 6 hours to make the spreadsheet alone. He wasn't joking. And I said, there's no utility in this. It's beautiful. It looks great. But it can be done so much faster. So here's what I said. Rather than making up this stuff, have the client give you this in Excel. I've got all this listed down here. I can make this just a little smaller. We'll print it so you can have it all tomorrow. Okay, so this is actually somebody's project, so I probably should get rid of that number for tomorrow. Okay, I've tweaked their Social Security numbers, so to fix that. I've got all of them in here, and by the way, this is going to list this out. So if I came back in here and said, let's just go up here, and I'll do this a little bit more tomorrow. I wanted to sort this. Oh man, I can't find my mouse. Where did it go? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sort it. Oh, it didn't work the way I wanted it to, did it? Custom sort by column. And I want that column to be cancel E. Okay, so I'm going to sort it on E. That tells me what kind of recert I have. Oh, don't be such an idiot. Now, when I get down here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that were MI. You see that? MI means move-ins. So I only had 5 people move into this unit. What's my sample size for 5? 1. It's 10%, right? So at this stage, this is 80 units, by the way. So 80 units. If I looked at my 5 new ones, my 5 old ones, I probably had 85 people in this unit. So my sample might be 9. So I come down here and I sorted this and I said, okay. By the way, the two, why we show 2 of these is because during the year the utility adjustment occurred. And so that second one is to adjust for the utility allowance changing by $25 in some cases. So what's that? Yeah, I just had them recount. They were masked on the first 5 were masked, so their Social Security number shouldn't be different, but I didn't want to go through a bunch of time to write an if statement to do all this. And in my real one, I will, but not today. So I said, okay, there's 5. Okay, I sample 1. Now, I could even say to myself, because of the risk of having new stuff go on, maybe I'll sample 2. Now, that tells me that's my choice, right? My minimum was 1. I may choose 2. But I only had 2 move-ins. I mean, I had 5 move-ins, so the rest are fine. And so I say, look, my total sample size has to be 9, because total tenants throughout the year were probably 85. Now, units are 80, but total tenants were 85. So I said, that's 9. I came down here and selected my move-in, and I said, okay, pick 2. Now all the rest, and I test those just the way I described, the full boat test. In fact, by the way, what I'm going to do first, if you want to make an assessment about cutting down the work in the tenant files, you have to do something to justify that, right? You're going to have some risk assessment procedures. The first thing I would do is I would pick 1 move-in, and that would be my walk-through file. And I would go through that file, and I would pound it with a hammer. Okay? And I would say that's as much detailed work as I ever want to do on any tenant file. But based on the outcome of that, you're going to come to a conclusion that the tenant files are not in bad shape, hopefully. If you now come to if the tenant file supports that in the walkthrough, you have some additional basis for trimming the procedure slightly, right? But in this case, I've got 2 of them. I'll beat those 1 or 2 up, and I'm going to test it for everything required that I can, that's in the guide.
What do you do? We actually use this chart for our testing, so the same thing. You mean as far as selecting? Oh, no, we do it a little differently. We take the full population and then pick our sample, and if we don't have a move-in, then we go find a move-in and replace them. We get to the same
Yeah, we're going to the same place.
We just do our selection a little differently.
Yeah, so see, here's my thing. I want to focus my sample a little differently. I'm not totally random. So for me, I'm going to say, okay, I want to bifurcate my sample between move-ins and overalls. And I want to, because the audit guide asked me to pick people that moved in anyway. So I felt that sample, even though I don't like doing the fair housing test, I still like doing the full boat test for the tenant file. So I'll do it that way. We're in the same position. It doesn't really matter because it's a judgment call. So in my case, I have the list of move-ins very clearly here. I pick the 2. I pick the other ones randomly from throughout the year and do the abbreviated annual recertification procedures. If I'm to rewrite the guide today, that's what I'm going to rewrite it to say. In fact, in the audit guide, that's what I have said. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit more tomorrow because this is extremely easy to get. The client has no problem getting you this data. And in fact, I believe they can theoretically give you access to this. There's something wrong in my theory, though, because I have plenty of people assign me access, but I can't see it. So there's a little piece I'm missing with tracks. What's that? Not for tracks. EIV, I have to take training. And I can't have that access anyway as the auditor. So tracks is never covering those EIV income reports. There should be no restrictions on you getting access to these. In fact, I've talked to a ton of clients, and they believe there's no restriction on giving you this, because this is the summary of the 5.9 they give you anyway. Okay? Rather than seeing each individual 5.9, they give you this summary of that data. Okay, now we'll talk about it more tomorrow, but that's how I use that list to come out and make that determination of which items to sample. Like I said, ultimately I would get rid of these extras because I don't really care that the utility allowance changed by $2, or in this case, $25, depending on what was going on. What I know is I have all 80 units. I have all the tenants for the year. HUD says that's about a monthly voucher amount of $122 or $121. Oh, I screwed it up again. I made some change. Yesterday it worked just fine. Before I resorted it, somehow I screwed the sort up. So anyway, we're only on the hook for the recert procedures. Now that is where we want to be, and this is the justification in a lot of ways for getting there. It's just that a lot of people, because of the way the audit guide's written, they're shy about making that change. Obviously, I'm really not. So, and partly, if I were to rewrite this, here's what I would do. I would say move-ins. The application, the lease, the consents, the 5.9, verification of Social Security number. I don't know why I didn't add the other one in here, which was citizenship. Okay? All in the same case, I would be looking at subsidy EIV reports. And then for all tenants, I'm looking at verification of income, including EIV, family count, consents, signed 5.9, and this year I added the changes were made to the VAWA lease. I might also add at the top, I probably need to revise this again and just say, I don't have to do that. Well, here you go. We'll go back to the recertification procedures I just minimized. It wasn't there, was it?
That's gone on the notice itself.
Yeah, in this case, recertification procedures didn't talk about running the family composition report. It's a tool, but I don't know that it's mandatory. Oh, on the move-in. That might be the case, yes. I don't have no problem with that. It's not on the recert, I know that. Okay. So in that particular case, we end up with some opportunities to have some changes in the tenant file testing and make some adjustments to this. This is the old one. I keep minimizing, and now I can't get them back because I. So I might, if I had the ability to sit down and type, I may make a couple of changes to this, okay? And maybe Justin's right. Maybe I go back and look at this and say, family composition report is run. I can have access to, which is, by the way, you can get access to all those reports without even the rules of behavior being signed. The only thing the rules of behavior require are the income reports, right? So you can get all those other reports sent to you. It's just the income reports which can't be sent outside of the client's offices.
So, I'm thinking about the master file. I mean, that's half the reports that the master file. In the event that this.
But the good news is it's one event of reviewing a master file instead of 25 or whatever sample items, right? So the master file still, and I left that in my other procedures, by the way. My other procedure, I still show review of the master files as an overall tenant file test. It's just not tied to individual tenant files.
So what you're saying is the reports, let's say, for example, you get sent to the master file when you go on site, you're out of town.
Mm-hmm.
They, because there's not, at least half the reports, they can that's not.
It's the income reports that are the problem. I mean, hell, they send you the 5.9s all the time now, which have Social Security numbers in them. So it's whatever the reason behind that sensitivity to the income reports, whatever it is, right? I don't know that I understand it. It did. So it's a little crazy, but it is what it is. So I'm going, okay, I'm not trying to swim against it. We just do it. We deal with it. And how some of the other firms do it by not going on site at all, I don't really get it. I don't know how you go through a tenant file process without getting access to those reports. I don't know how you justify it.
You skip the material step we talked about earlier on verifying income. And just a third-party verification for employment verification or letters for Social Security.
But what if the only third-party verification the client uses is EIV, which is an intentional thing? So how do you do that? I don't know. I don't know. But again, I'm surprised by a lot of things. Quite frankly, I have a firm in West Virginia that has been replacing the management company, has the management company, and then still doing the audit. And the management company says, how do I protect myself against this? And I'm going, so I've got to contact Wendell or somebody because the HUD office told the client, we can't do anything about it. We don't like it, but we can't do anything about it. We've been told it's okay. And I'm going, who told you it's okay? I want to know who is telling you it's okay. Because I can't, in any scenario, when we talk about independence tomorrow or non-audit services, I can't imagine any scenario in which that actually works. It's absolutely evil. I hate to say it from our end, but the minute we start doing that crap, we are absolutely selling our soul to the devil. And that firm's willing to do it. They're actually someone I know, which is a problem. Because they're apparently building a whole new business on management company work and then auditing them at the same time. And that sure reduces my testing, doesn't it? Look, it comes down to West Virginia. Every weird thing that ever happened to me in West Virginia. Seriously. Every weird flying thing I ever had in an airplane happened in L.A. But every other weird thing that's just sort of generally really freaky happened to me in West Virginia. I think I told you last year about my meth lab. Don't you remember I told you about my senior housing meth lab? Section 202, meth lab. Granny went Breaking Bad. I think she shaved her head, everything. Granny Heisenberg, we call her now. Literally, and I didn't realize how easy it is to have a desktop cooker.
We've never had it in an elderly housing, but we've had it in one of our HUD properties.
It was elderly housing, and I said, how? See, here's the problem. They only had 24 units. That meth lab, when it was discovered, how the hell knows how you don't smell this, right? I don't know. But it polluted that unit and the 2 consecutive units next to it. So 1/8 of the units go offline for a complete teardown to studs to detox it. So revenue goes through the floor, and I'm doing the submission going, what happened to your revenue? Well, we had a meth lab. Granny was cooking. And the lady's really nice. I mean, they don't know their head from a hole in the ground. I'm serious. They are absolutely the dumbest people I have come across in terms of compliance with this agreement. And I feel bad for them because they're mark to market, so MBI's got them by the throat. And they have no protections because nobody knows what they're doing. The ED was fired because he wanted to buy, his goal was to be able to push snow at the project and charge $6,000 to push snow. So he's fired. Anyway, I felt bad for them all, so it's owner-certified submission. So I just didn't disclose. I made some excuses in this discussion about their occupancy, and I shouldn't have. Every time I do that too, it goes wrong. It goes wrong for me. But anyway, Granny went Breaking Bad. And then the other time we went there to do business. We had to talk about buying. This was in my prior life, buying a business there. And the 2 guys, really young, younger than these 2 sitting up front. And they had very successful little business. And the minute we sit down, they give us an incest joke about West Virginia. It took about 5 minutes to tell. And of course, I'm sitting here at the end of the punchline looking at my boss. I'm the CFO, he's the CEO. We're looking at each other and I'm going, we got to get the hell out of here, right? This has gone off the rails. We haven't even started. And of course, during the meeting, we leave. And we're in a hurry to leave now. I could hear the banjos the entire time. I said, what about that joke, right? What'd you think about that joke? That was something, wasn't it? And he goes, forget the damn joke. He said one of the 2 partners crossed his legs during the meeting. And when he crossed his legs, his pants pulled up, and he had on a brown socks with this ugly brown suit, which I hate brown. I don't know. But the brown suit came up, and he had brown socks on that went to here, and underneath he had white tube socks on. And I thought, under those tube socks, I'm going to probably find red long johns with a trap door. Anyway, so I'm out of West Virginia for good now. But I don't know how to make that happen. So anyway, sorry. And aside. It's late in the day. Stretch. Cut the time off. Go. Quick, go home. So we end up having this, this opportunity to make some changes. If tomorrow I wouldn't mind some conversation about this. If you had the opportunity to say, Les, here's what we want to do. Here's what we think we would do. We'll write it right up, and I'll just put it in my presentation to HUD. So how would HAW structure their tenant file test if they had the ability to do whatever the hell they wanted, other than the only requirement being that you had to test minimum sample sizes? Okay? Because we're not going to get around those. That's never going away. So we'll talk some more about that tomorrow. But in our case, we'll do this whole thing in a little more detail tomorrow with that as we wrap up in the next 10 minutes today. So we ended up with, where am I? Slide 56. 55. So the income report is third-party verification. You know what, Justin? I'm going to go do. What was you said that was the household composition report? Is that what it's actually? That's the formal name. Okay. I'm going to go look for that. No, it's okay. I just want the actual section it's in. Okay, that's what I'll just do it in. I want to even know if it's in these slides because I didn't see it here, and it should have been in here. So sex offender. Owner must not run the EIV income report until consent. We're good with all that. Search for state sex offender registration and verify Social Security numbers. So here again, owners, if you have, I have to make a caveat to that change. If I go for an interim or an annual recertification and I've had a change in household, that person has to have the background checks run on them also, right? So we're good for that. And that's the problem with being, I guess, consistent enough to get this done. Terminations of failure to move to a different size unit within 30 days as required by the HUD lease. That's now a key requirement. Failure to disclose and provide Social Security numbers for everybody. We've already made that change. Maybe I don't really... drug abuse. Look, we've gone through all this stuff. They must offer the... Oh, that guess is interesting. We must offer the family to move the member from the household. That's a new change. So, one of you is a pervert. We give you the chance to move him out before we kick you out. All I know is when it happened in our neighborhood, and it happened here just about a year and a half ago, there was a rental house. And I don't know who's ever living in that house. Look, our neighborhood is so tight Mormon that within my church, my congregation, it's 4 blocks. And they're like 100 families. They're all Mormon, and 4 are not. Now, that sounds like living in hell, probably, right? It's actually not that offensive for most of the folks. They don't care. But it's a tight neighborhood, so everybody knows everybody. So one day the cops, here's this people moving in, and the cops come driving down the road the next day. And there's a lady out walking with her kids in a stroller, and he says, "Hey, ma'am, where do you live?" Right? I think she was right by her house, and she goes, "I live right here." "Oh, now we have to tell you, in your neighborhood now is a sex offender who's considered by the police to be dangerous." Well, anyway, you know how this works. About 3 weeks later, the whole thing was gone. Because I don't know what these people were doing over there to put the pressure on them, but they were gone in a heartbeat. So I don't know how this works. And I think if I couldn't get them to move out, I'd just leak the fact that Unit 21 had a sex offender in it, and they'd probably be gone the next day, right? Doesn't matter. He's gone. Mm-hmm. Now, subsidy changes now. So now, in fact, it's probably a planned event because now he's a guest. No, conjugal visits. I don't know. So they would recalculate her subsidy, and she would get a full boat subsidy now. She might even be negative rents when you consider all that going in with the utility allowance. She may be getting money back. So, see, that's the thing. So there's a protection there. I don't know if it's a great thing. It's just the way it is, right? I don't know how you deal with all this because this is if you talk to the owners, if you ever talk to your owners really about their business, just sat and said, "Hey, what's this business really like?" And what you'll find is this. If I talk to my owners about the risk, I did it yesterday. I had 3 owners in the class. I said, forget all this crap. Forget all this audit guide, audit this. Tell me what this is like to run this business. What's your day like? How do you manage your business? What's your problems? You know what they both said? Their biggest single risk. Bed bugs. Both of them said, my biggest fear is bed bug infestation. Because it disrupts my units, because now it's expensive. She said, we have even offered, in some cases, we've considered offering a room where we could bring your stuff in and cook it before you move it into our units, because we have to go to 6 hours at 140 degrees to kill the bed bugs. But it's expensive to bring the machinery in. So they're terrified of bed bug infestations. She said, that's my number one business risk right now is bed bugs, because I can't deal with the cost. The units go down, people move out, everybody freaks out. I'm on the hook for all this change, right? Because if I show up now, you got to move them out of the unit, get rid of their stuff or have some remediation. Fix the unit, but by then they've already crawled down the pipes or the electrical wire, and now you got to start reaching into the next 2 or 3 units, cook them off, and clean their stuff. And if you don't get up on top of it fast, if someone doesn't notice them, right? So I thought that was interesting. All the things we go around worrying about, and their biggest problem and fear is bed bugs. They said that's the number one bane of our existence. Tenants lying, they lie all the time. We don't care about this, that. But when they bring in those dang bed bugs, it is a thing we can't control the cost of it. Because now we have to remediate, we're on the hook for everything, and we're just not sure who's moving in here, what they're moving in. And that's the thing they can't fix.
We've had a couple of properties who had that and had to take money out of their replacement reserve.
Oh, yeah. In fact, reserves and residual receipts are both available for remediation on bed bugs. So that's a sobering thought. What, just why I went back to the Marriott last night and tore my bed apart. In fact, both the owners, this is not a joke, both the owners tell me they will not go to a hotel without their light. They will not let their kids go in the hotel room until they take their infrared, their black light, and go through the sheets and everything, because these little bugs leave tracks wherever they go. I'm afraid I'd turn that light on and get a whole other discovery of what's, some CSI show. But they said they won't even let their kids into the hotel room until the dad goes in and scans all the, tears the bed apart, the couch, looks for those bed bug tracks.
I don't want to travel anymore.
Of course, I live in hotels, and I started going,
Do you take your light?
no, my friends at Nan McKay, they travel with lights.
Yeah.
They gave every employee a light to carry to check their bedroom. And they say the minute you call down and say, I've got these tracks on my bed, that hotel you'll be moved to a suite. They will do it. They are so afraid of it that I prefer to live in ignorance. But that was an interesting thing to me. I went home, we only had one thing for our rollerboard, and so I had mine sitting on the floor. My wife said, no way in hell that's sitting on the floor. You move that up onto the little stand. She put hers on the ottoman. Here again, their risks and our ideas are quite different. So sex offenders a big thing to them. Drew Sojan we've added has a list. So we can use, everybody can use Drew Sojan now. Owners may not suspend, terminate, reduce, or make a final denial of benefits until they verify the conflicting information. Discrepancies, of course, this is EIV, and we're on the hook for getting the client's on the hook for resolving all of those. Discrepancies are all a big thing. Okay, and I think that is about it. Okay, so here's what I think we'll do. Isn't it 8:43, 8:44, something right now? 3:44, 8:44. Okay. So we're about ready to quit anyway. What I think I'll do is we'll hold the rest off till tomorrow. You can turn that. We're done. We'll come back tomorrow. Have your book. We're going to use the. You can hear me now? Looks like we got most of them now. What's that? I think I'm just waiting for Jana to give me the Heidi Ho. Do you think they even heard you?
No, they're not listening.
All right, we're ready to get started. Did everybody sign the sign-in sheets? And does anybody need a book?
Everybody get the sign-in sheet?
There's another one.
Of course.
You can't look. I understand exactly what this is, right? You.
It's just not interesting material.
It's accounting. It's work. I can talk about really interesting things, but most of people would be offended. So. It's just not what you want to put down on your CPE form.
Just like the gap update every year. Just can't make that interesting.
I don't know. It depends.
All right, we're ready.
Justin doesn't give us time. That's because we were here on time. It's still going to be 4 hours. Dude, you can't follow basic instructions. Yeah, well, he wore a jacket though. Okay, let's get going. Welcome back. I'm cold now. I'm going to have to put on my pullover for riding on the airplane. No, I don't want a jacket. You wouldn't fit, trust me. I'd be doing the Hulk thing in it, and it wouldn't be muscle. Okay, I want to go to section 4 in the book. Independence. I'm not sure I really need to have this conversation with your firm, but last week I said that, and 3 of the people in the room had failed peer review in Chicago. So I just left it on the agenda to do no matter what. And especially today, we're trying to get our other 4 hours in. So here's the thing. In 2011, the GAO issued their new yellow book. So government auditing standards were revised, and one of the single biggest thing that came out of that were modifications to the independence rules. In particular, non-audit services have been determined to be, I guess, the single greatest threat to independence. That is, unless you're in West Virginia and want to run a management company. And then apparently somebody says that's okay. So this has turned out to be a fairly significant event for the HUD audits, RD audits, single audits for smaller companies, simply because the entities we deal with are small. So as a general idea of what's going on, most firms provide 5 to 6 non-audit services to their clients. Now the problem with all that is just simply coming down to the numbers. These independence rules put you in a position to be barely 1 notch below the PCAOB rules. And that just basically says you can't do non-audit services. So we can do them still, but we have to do a lot of oversight to make sure we have not impaired our independence. Now these rules, when people dream them up, they don't think about this one small segment of the audit population. They see universities, they see all this other stuff where the yellow book gets applied, big entities, big nonprofits, and here we sit with 23,000 HUD audits, soon to be another, 18, 20,000 RD, I don't know how many will be audited. And of course, maybe in single audit a little bit too, and we're sitting here with these little engagements for which we probably are required to provide 9 audit services for this thing to work. So that's the problem for the CPA crowd in this particular market. And that's why it doesn't get a ton of attention in the overall press of the industry, because they know it. But the GAQC knows this is an issue, and in particular for our areas where we have a submission, we have a tax return, we help with the statements, maybe a data collection form, all this stuff going on. So we have ended up with these new rules. Now, the guidance that I've got today comes straight from the AICPA. And they have placed on the GAQC website a bunch of guidance that basically tells auditors you need to follow this when you provide non-audit services. And if you don't provide pretty much that, they fail peer review. Well, fail. You get comments. Not just MFCs, but they go all the way to report comments. So last week, and the problem further I didn't know until last week. I was in Chicago. We're going through this class. The debate came up because I had 3 peer reviewers in the room. Okay, one of whom had just been peer reviewed, and there were at least 3 other firms in the room who had basically received letters of comment on failure to meet these rules. So it's been a significant thing. The peer review guy, the one of my friends who's the peer reviewer, he had filled out material from PPC and later went back and looked at it, didn't quite feel comfortable, he didn't know why, and he wrote a memo. That memo was the only thing that saved him because the PPC form that he had was deemed by his peer reviewer to be inadequate. So the form we have today has been deemed to be adequate. So that's the reason why this is going on. And they've made a ton of announcements about it to try to let people know you can't do this. And they've basically said from the checklist, this is the single biggest item on the peer review checklist for right now. I mean, for a yellow book job. So you have to document the skills, knowledge, and experience, and it can't be achieved through a representation letter alone. You need to actually reach a conclusion based on evidence that the client has the SKE. SKE means skills, knowledge, and experience, sufficient to oversee the non-audit service. Further, you have to make sure you document your assessment of the risks of performing the non-audit services and show them how you have reduced the risks to an acceptable level. And client actions alone cannot reduce the risk. You have to implement some procedures. And they tell us right here, auditors are expected to document an assessment under the standards. Therefore, completion of a checklist does not provide for documentation of the actual evaluation will be unlikely to comply. And it starts here. This requirement is applicable for any and all permitted non-audit services, regardless of how significant they are to the audit. So they all have to be assessed. And by the way, preparation of the financial statements is by default always significant. So they've instituted that peer review. Apparently this year wasn't your peer review for you, right? Okay. Next year? Okay. So I think by now the new PPC form has probably been modified because they had failures. That was kind of an embarrassment, I'm assuming. So the one we made appears very close, apparently, to be what was on the GAQ's website. So now here's the thing: independence was this whole issue of being independent in mind. But the bigger problem was independence in appearance. I don't think non-audit services ever made an auditor not independent in their mind. It just gave them the appearance that they weren't independent, which is a little crazy because, first of all, hell, they pay us to do the audit. I mean, quite frankly, I want to be hired again. And this is also crazy because Birmingham, you guys do a lot of work in Alabama. The Birmingham office has now been forcing, in certain public housing and some multifamily, to tell them you had the same auditor for 3 years, you need to automatically rotate. You need to go out for proposal. They're going on to forced auditor rotation in that office. And, of course, we've been writing them a letter that, under these standards, and it's primarily because of this familiarity threat. I said, look, familiarity may be a bad thing, but it's also a very good thing. You tell clients they want to retool an audit team every 3 years, they'll be very unhappy. Okay, sometimes the board thinks they're going to get a big benefit, but who suffers the most? It's the people in accounting who basically have to get familiar with everybody again, retool their process, Anyway, so that's not been working for them very well, and I think they don't understand how this process works. So our problem is that we need to appear reasonable to somebody else, and that somebody else is a reasonably informed third party. Now, someone like yourself evaluating someone else, which is why I kind of look at this and say, if I told you the management company was also the auditor, every other CPA of the country I've ever seen says that's got to be a violation. Well, if that's not independence or impairment in appearance, then I don't know what is. So we have this idea going on in the profession that we need to adhere to this standard, and we're being applied. I think it started back with SAS 108 in the beginning, right? You had to say if your client couldn't prepare their own financial statements, then you had to give them a significant fiduciary material weakness. Then we evolved a little further, and we kind of pulled frankly, the biggest impact to that was us, again, because small clients, yellow book. It's kind of like this stuff for the PCPS. You guys have maybe clients that fit under the PCPS business model. Well, HUD jobs will never be there. Neither will RD because they're all yellow book. And you can't apply the PCPS private company standards to a yellow book client. So here's the structure. We have to look at all the non-audit services performed, identify the significant threats to independence, and then evaluate those services individually and in the aggregate and apply safeguards. So that's the process by which we do this. And if you're unable to reduce the threat, you shouldn't do the non-audit service. Now, I doubt very much that most people are going to eliminate the non-audit service, nor do I believe most people are impaired from their non-audit service. So what you're going to have to do is show the sufficient documentation to allow them to conclude to conclude with you the same thing. Now, here are the types of threats they looked at. Self-interest. Well, I have a self-interest, right? The self-interest is I want to be rehired, I want to be paid. In fact, it's the only thing I want to be 100% sure of. So that is a self-interest threat. Self-review. Now, so the problem is I'm alone. You don't have that issue here. I mean, you have a big firm. You get a lot of levels of review. You have a whole quality control process. But I've got sole practitioners who have a certain issue here. In fact, they were told by their peer review they would fail the self-review thing because they weren't doing their own reviews. And the guy says, how do I review myself? And the answer, you take the peer review checklist. A couple months after the close of busy season, you sit down, you go through 2 or 3 jobs, evaluate yourself with the checklist. Keep the documentation. So, familiarity, of course, with the client. Familiarity, I thought the word was familiarity breeded contempt. But in this case, it breeds lack of independence. It also allows you to be much more efficient in your audit, understand what the risks are. So there's a two-edged sword for this. Of course, undue influence can be sometimes even attributed to fees, extremely low fees. Okay, now management participation. I had that one here. Sorry, I don't get into this individual slide change thing. Now, we would never, unless I'm in West Virginia, take the role on of management. So I don't think anyone really has that big of a problem. We don't have a problem with structure. Now, what are the routine audit services that are not considered non-audit? There aren't very many things. You can provide advice. You can do some research. You can educate the client on a technical issue. Best practices, benchmarks. One of the things we've tried to do to help the industry do that is go through our analytical review. So people ask us now about this reasonable operating expense level, and they've been challenged by HUD on it quite a bit. We provide that analytical review that has 2,300 entities in it, and now we have a pretty, it's a 10% of HUD's database. So we allow some of those benchmarks to be shared with the client, with you, and then you can share them with the client. They're also just good audit tools in general. So we have the ability to do that, and of course that's a very, very small amount of work in the scope of your services. Always prohibited, I think you get this. Assuming management responsibilities in any shape, way, whatever. You cannot ever act as management. You can't set policy. You can't have custody of assets. Again, I don't think anybody on this list or in this room has work on that list. That's not going to be your problem here at all. Now, the rest of this I'm going to skip over pretty fast. Non-tax benefit plan. Look, we don't do any of those. The people I know don't do anything close to that. IT services, maybe. Now, here's where we actually get some things that are common. Preparing transactions management has determined or approved. Okay, now we do that. We do a lot of that. We prepare the statements. We may post entries to our working trial balance. We probably prepare account reconciliations. All those are allowed in certain circumstances, but every one of those must be evaluated as a non-audit service. So, and I know for most people you have that. I'm not going to 14 and 15. 14 is not that important to us today. Now here's the thing. Auditors have to implement safeguards. And you will have to document what those safeguards are. And I haven't seen the new PPC form. So how you do this, I think, will be a choice between my form and you can get the AICPA's form. You can see what PPC has. If you use the PPC form, I would compare it to my form because my form will meet those standards, or compare it to the AICPA form. It's only $28, so I just kind of revolt against the $28. It's a simple spreadsheet. Just hand it out. If you want them to comply, give it away for free. They don't always see that way. So you consult with other auditors, professional organizations. Certainly we fill that role. Now, your firm has a little different approach because of the size. But a lot of sole practitioners, the first thing I tell them to do when they have questionable areas in their audit, and they're doing all these non-audit services, is send an email to Les, and then you reach out to somebody and say, what's the normal thing we see here? What do the rules say? So you're not on the hook alone for interpreting a sensitive issue. And if you do that, okay, that's one safeguard already. So it has nothing to do with the actual non-audit service you're performing. It's simply that because we perform non-audit services, are we influenced to provide answers that favor the client because we're so influenced by the non-audit service money or something like that. Well, I don't really believe that can be the case because most of these are so small dollar-wise it doesn't matter. But certainly preparation of the financial statements. So coming to some conclusions of that nature can be achieved by GAQC, another professional organization, a collaboration inside your own firm, outreach to others. So if you're on the job, you may say, hey, what do we do to make this happen, or how does this work for us? Okay, next. Available only to responsible contractors. And so they have rules on which a nonprofit has to procure now under the single audit rules. Now, for-profits can do about whatever they want, but under the single audit rules, we have these particular requirements. Now, they have to have a written selection procedure in place. They can require certain things. We have small purchase procedures, which almost all audit services would fall under. So they could come under different rules, and they can even come under micro purchases sometimes at less than $15,000. So some of these rules don't necessarily apply to all of that because they can come in smaller. And when something is procurement's over $150,000, you can see the rest of this. That other than how it affects follow-up. The corrective action plan will now include all 24 CFR Part 5. Okay, we're back. That's the easiest 10 minutes of training you ever sat through. It's okay. We're all friends here. And it's Friday, and they're going, this is, That's right. Okay, so we have the cap. We talked about that being split between completed and not completed. The language about the oddities, that one thing A133 has that HUD did not have was the ability to take a finding that had been in place for 2 consecutive years and make the decision, the oddity could make the decision that it was no longer valid because 2 years have passed, the agency hadn't done anything about it, and there had been no formal management decision issued by HUD. That was originally removed so that all findings had to stay. They added that back in the final rule. So that's good news. We keep that. So if a finding has been in place 2 years, HUD hasn't taken action on it, in theory you can drop that finding now because it is considered to be no longer valid. That's current A133 rule anyway. We just get to keep it. Of course, corrective action plan was coming into there. Now, report package must be submitted, and you still have 9 months. That's great. So here's the rule. Submitted within 30 days of the report receipt or 9 months. It's mostly 8 months and 3 weeks and 4 days. That's how it usually works in the world we see. The report package is submitted. Now, of course, you know, data collection forms are all being uploaded now with all your financial statements. So that's a bunch of cheery information, right? I mean, you're thrilled with that. So you're going to upload the AFS and the CFA, the schedule of prior audit findings, the report, and the corrective action plan. They're going to be, you have to retain those for 3 years. The scope of the audit, no changes, really, except down in this 6th bullet, compliance is to focus on the largest compliance requirements, not the minutia. Now, from my perspective, certainly on tenant files, that's why I went to 4. Those key 4 things, because I think those things are kind of material things, whereas a lot of the other things are, frankly, worse than minutia. But they are, to me, they would be considered minutia. You must include a test of transactions. You must test internal control. None of that's changed. The reports are the same. Now, findings. Significant deficiencies, material weaknesses, and material non-compliance. Known or likely fraud, so everything's the same as yesterday. The threshold for question costs of significance goes from $10,000 to $25,000. And we added a brand new section on audit finding clarity and detail. Of course, what does it look like? Yesterday's HUD discussion. And then it says, even here, population, it should be population data. Oh man, I hate that. Population data from samples and projections to the population. So A133 actually expects you to project error rates. And then if statistical sampling is used, provide documentation to show how your conclusions were reached. If it was an immediate repeat of a prior finding, you're supposed to indicate that. Okay, audit documentation. I think here, extent of agreement between accounting records and financial statements. I don't know really why that's in place. To me, it should work pretty easily. Now, risk-based approach has been modified. We still have a risk-based approach, but it is slightly modified, and we will change it to be, the threshold will be 750, and that goes from less than 25 million. If you're over 25 million but less than 100 million, it's 0.03, 100 million, less than a billion, 3 million. You can go up the calculations there and see how this is going to work. So most of us are going to be, I can't imagine being out of this range no matter what. So my AB threshold will generally always be 750. So here's the thing. Remember this. This is now unique. The audit threshold is 750, and the AB threshold is also 750. Currently, the audit threshold is 500, but the AB threshold is 300. So we increased the threshold up by 250, but really increased the AB threshold by 350. So that's a pretty good change in this particular case. Now, if you're not an A program because you're not 750, you're still labeled a B program, but we're going to change how many Bs we have to pick. But of course, loans, large loan programs, which we have, if they exceed 4 times the largest non-loan program, it is considered large. In most of our cases, those do work out that way. I have some smaller nonprofits that have older, more mature 202s or small capital advances. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry. It begins with fiscal years beginning January 1, 2015. I should say this, beginning after 12/15/2014. So the first year under audit is 12/31/15. But I'm covering it. We'll have more detail next year because we'll have compliance supplements that will all be different. We'll have all the other stuff. And so next year, this is just sort of a let you know how to look at the future. As you look at your portfolio this year, what will change next year, so you kind of understand where you're going to go. So large loan programs, if you're 4 times the next largest non-loan program, it's considered large, then it's always automatically A. If not, or I should say it's excluded from the calculation. If not, it's just like everything else. You determine which A's or B's are there and how to audit them. Of course, they have this caveat here. For purposes of this paragraph, a program is only considered to be a federal program providing loans if the value of federal awards expended for loans within the program comprises 50% or more of the total federal awards for the program. So I'm looking at a Section 202 or 811, a PRAC. Those clearly fit the bill here in every case. But there could be some in the Section 202 where that might not be the case. I could see other nonprofits with that, with HUD not being, with that not qualifying. Okay, high risk and low risk. Audited once in the last 2 years, so every 3rd year it must be audited. No material weaknesses. Unqualified compliance report. No question costs. Question costs are less than 5% of total awards, and it's not identified by the agency as high risk. I've never actually seen an agency identified high risk one, other than ARA, which was all high risk no matter which agency you had. So I don't think we've ever had a HUD one that was major. So now you identify your A's, anything over 750. You now identify your B's, and of course you do the same same process to consider risk. And those that are high risk, you are not required to identify more. And people tell me it's supposed to be easier, but the language is a little twisted. You're not required to identify more high-risk type B programs than at least 1/4 the number of low-risk type A's. Now, you will be the only one that's facing this because of in your nonprofits, you may have some of these with multiple programs, right? If you're just HUD, it's not going to be a huge issue. Loan, subsidy, capital advance, PRAC together. But your others, certainly may have this challenge. Because you might have a bunch of, say, the schools or some of those that have federal awards. They're not nonprofits. They're event pass-throughs. They're getting money from an agency that passed it through, right?
Some of them are.
Okay. So when I'm looking at your if you're looking at your portfolio, you'll just have to look which ones are single audit, which ones will have this challenge with multiple programs, 7 or 8 programs. Now, housing authorities, we always have at least 7 or 8 programs in most of the good-sized ones. So I have found over time, I put this previously in a spreadsheet, and when I look at housing authority auditors, I figure that about 40 to 50% of the housing authority auditors miscalculated the major programs in any given year. Why? I have no idea. Tim probably has a better idea, you know. Clusters or just cluster something else. I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. You'll edit me?
Sure.
Okay. I think it's just mostly idiotic auditors. Frankly, I really believe that. So they've got that thing going on. Now, so major programs are all high-risk A's. All high-risk B's that were identified, other than you didn't have to do more than 1/4 the number of low-risk A's. And then anything else needed to provide your percentage of coverage rule. But that's changed. If you're a low-risk out of T, you only need to cover 20% of federal awards in any given year. If you're not low risk, you have to cover 40. Now that gives you some benefit into the future, does it not, Jana? So we expect a lot of this testing to be curtailed, and of course, once we go there, when we move on down into the actual procedures, we're told not to focus on minutia, but to focus on the major or material compliance requirements. So how that plays out will be in accordance with your judgment. So again, your judgment on this decision is pretty much not reviewable. So federal risk, I think, if you look at this, I don't really see anything now where I have a big issue with high risk program risk, any program risk issues. In the last year or two, I've had it in public housing. But I don't. The only reason I may call something public or from public housing as high risk would be maybe this PBRA conversion stuff in RAD. And the only reason I might look at it as high risk is because the auditor doesn't know what the hell the client doesn't know what they're doing, right? It's not that the program's a high risk or anything for you. You know what the program is, but the client is completely retooling in some cases. It depends on who's managing. But I don't think we have any of these that are fairly significant unless you've had a lot of findings. I don't have anything here that really bothers me. So low risk, timely data collection forms submitted. Unqualified opinions, no material weaknesses, no going concern, no audit findings from type A programs with a material weakness, qualified compliance, or question cost greater than 5% of total awards. So those criteria change a little bit. That's it. So you can look forward to some changes next year. As you look at your portfolio, of course, in training next year, you will have